At 2:30 a.m. on June 6, 2025, Engels Air Base in Russia's Saratov Oblast lay under the cool stillness of early summer night. The vast facility, one of the crown jewels of Russia's long-range aviation, was bathed in the harsh glare of floodlights. Their beams swept across rows of aircraft that symbolized Moscow's power and reach. Tu-95 Bear bombers, with their unmistakable turboprop engines and contra-rotating propellers, stood in long lines. Relics of the Cold War, but still lethal in their ability to launch cruise missiles thousands of miles away. Nearby, the sleeker and more modern Tu-160 Blackjacks, the heaviest supersonic bombers in the world, gleamed white under the lights. Their delta wings folded like resting predators. For decades, Engels had been the backbone of Russia's nuclear deterrent. It housed the aircraft that gave Moscow intercontinental strike capability, but also nuclear weapons. To Russian commanders, Engels was more than a military installation. It was a symbol of reach and security, immune to foreign attack. It was supposed to be untouchable, but that illusion had been cracking for years. Ukrainian drones had already struck Engels multiple times since late 2022, each attack eroding Russia's aura of invulnerability. Still, Moscow insisted that its air defense systems, from the powerful S-400 missile batteries to the nimble Pantsir units, could shield its heartland. The early hours of June 6th told a different story. As rows of bombers sat quietly on the apron, engines cold, crews asleep, a new wave of Ukrainian drones was already inbound. Their engines whispered across the night sky, too small to be heard, too faint at first to be seen. Within the next hour, Engels would burn once more, and the myth of distance as protection would be shattered yet again. The operation had begun hours earlier on Ukrainian soil. From concealed launch sites, the first drones lifted into the night sky. Each launch was unremarkable in itself. A small fuselage, a propeller engine, and a wingspan no longer than a family car. But together, they represented a weapon system that had rewritten the rules of modern war. The force that headed towards Saratov that night was not uniform. Leading the attack were purpose-built Lutyi-class long-range drones, sleek, carbon fiber machines with radar signatures as small as birds. Intermixed with them were improvised designs, cheap commercial airframes modified with explosive payloads and navigation kits. What they lacked in sophistication, they made up for in numbers and clever programming. Where GPS signals remained unjammed, the drones flew straight and true, pulsing data back to their controllers. But Russian jammers had already thrown up walls of interference, creating dead zones across western Russia. These newer models had been equipped with optical navigation systems, cameras locked onto rivers, highways, and rail lines, comparing the winding patterns against stored maps. At treetop level, their AI brains adjusted course second by second. From Ukrainian command posts, operators sat in dim-lit rooms, eyes fixed on infrared feeds. They were not pilots in the traditional sense, as the drones were largely autonomous once launched. The goal was never total destruction. Ukraine lacked the scale for that. Instead, this mission was calibrated: harass Engels, light fires, and destroy infrastructure. But more than anything, to show Russia that no fortress was too deep and no bomber too safe. At 2:41 a.m., operators at a radar station south of Saratov noticed faint flickers on their screens. At first, the signals were brushed aside. Low-altitude interference was common along the Irtysh River Valley. But then, the contacts multiplied. Dozens of small returns appeared, clustered in groups, advancing on a steady bearing. One operator leaned forward, tapped his screen, and reset the gain. The signals persisted. On the perimeter, Pantsir S-1 units roared to life, their radars sweeping the black sky. S-300 batteries, stationed further out, rotated their massive phased arrays toward the southwest. Searchlights cut arcs through the dark as anti-air gunners scrambled to position. Inside barracks, crews stumbled from bunks, pulling on boots and jackets, some clutching helmets as they ran toward shelters or hangars. Drones had struck Engels before, but never in such numbers, never with this persistence. Inside the operations room, an officer barked orders to track every contact, but the screens were filling too fast. One radar tech muttered that the swarm looked more like a flock of birds than missiles. The problem was scale. Russia's vaunted defenses were designed to intercept fast, high-value targets, jets, cruise missiles, even hypersonic gliders. Against swarms of cheap, small drones, the system strained. It was like trying to swat a cloud of muskegers with a sledgehammer. Crews scrambled to tow bombers into hardened shelters, though most sat exposed on the open apron. Anti-air teams prepared to fire. Somewhere beyond the perimeter, the first drones slipped closer. Within minutes, the battle for Engels would begin in fire. 2:44 a.m., the first drone broke through the defensive cordon and slammed into Engels Air Base. Its target was a fuel storage depot on the western edge of the facility. The impact triggered a fireball that lit the night sky like dawn. Flames licked upward as aviation fuel caught and spread. Secondary explosions hammering the base within seconds. Shockwaves rippled through hangars and barracks. Barely a minute later, another drone screamed in low and fast, detonating against a maintenance hangar. The sheet metal structure crumpled in on itself as sparks from severed wiring set off smaller fires. Mechanics who had been jolted from sleep minutes earlier rushed toward shelters as shrapnel rattled across the tarmac. The chain reaction was swift. A service truck loaded with fuel canisters was parked too close to a taxiway. Flames from the hangar fire spread across the pavement, igniting the truck in a violent blast that hurled debris against the fuselage of a Tu-95 Bear bomber sitting nearby. One of its massive propeller blades bent inward as the fuselage caught fire along its wing route. Anti-air units responded with urgency. The dark sky above Engels suddenly filled with tracer fire. Panzer autocannons rattled off bursts of 30mm rounds, streaks of red and white slashing arcs overhead. Some drones disintegrated mid-air, their fragments scattering like fireworks. But for every target downed, more slipped through, weaving between bursts of fire. On the ground, chaos deepened. Bomber crews scrambled across the apron, some attempting to tow aircraft to safety, others running to shelters as alarms screamed. Orders shouted across the base were drowned out by the cacophony of cannon fire, explosions, and the whine of incoming drones. Engels, the fortress of long-range aviation, was in flames again. The strength of Engels had always been its scale, but in the early morning hours of June 6th, that scale became a liability. Rows of Tu-95 and Tu-160 bombers sat exposed on wide aprons, too large to move quickly, too slow to be sheltered in time. A Tu-160 sat vulnerable as nearby fuel trucks erupted, spraying fire across the tarmac. Secondary detonations compounded the disaster. A parked ammunition loader ignited, scattering fragments across the apron in sharp metallic blasts. Fire leapt from vehicle to vehicle, feeding on the base's own logistics. The crews tasked with saving the bombers faced an impossible choice: attempt to tow multi-million-dollar aircraft through burning debris, or retreat as waves of drones continued to streak in. Fire crews fought desperately, engines roaring across the base, hoses snaking toward flames that grew faster than water could douse them. Jets of foam sprayed across the burning wing of the damaged Tu-95, but every time progress was made, another secondary explosion erupted nearby. The sky above crackled with autocannon fire, forcing firefighters to duck for cover as tracer streams cut across their lines of sight. Videos posted online showed massive plumes of smoke and glowing fireballs on the horizon. The attack had become not just a military crisis, but a public spectacle, one Moscow could not easily deny. By 3 a.m., the drone barrage had largely subsided. The sky above Engels quieted, but the base itself was still engulfed in fire and smoke. Flames continued to devour the western fuel depot, leaving behind craters that would be visible from orbit by sunrise. The hangar struck earlier had collapsed entirely, its twisted skeleton glowing red. Satellite imagery released within 24 hours confirmed the damage. Scorched sections of runway, blackened craters at the fuel storage sites, and the charred remains of service buildings. Most striking were the burn scars on the apron, where bombers had sat only hours earlier. Analysts identified at least one Tu-95 visibly damaged, its wing blackened and warped. Others speculated that more aircraft parked in close proximity may have sustained shrapnel or fire damage, though the extent remained unclear. Russia's Ministry of Defense moved quickly to downplay the attack. A short statement described the raid as unsuccessful, claiming that all drones had been intercepted and that only minor damage had occurred. But the claim rang hollow. Open-source intelligence accounts cross-referenced satellite images with civilian videos showing secondary blasts and fires lasting for hours. Independent analysts concluded that losses were understated, if not deliberately concealed. Engels was not some border facility or regional airfield. It was the heart of Russia's long-range bomber force. Every fire chipped away at the myth of security. Whether one bomber was destroyed or several damaged, the message was the same. Engels could not be defended anymore. For decades, it has been the beating heart of Russia's strategic bomber fleet, home to the Tu-95 and Tu-160, the twin pillars of Moscow's long-range strike capability. These aircraft were designed not only to deliver conventional payloads, but also to serve as airborne symbols of nuclear deterrence. Their very presence on the apron was meant to project an image of permanence and invulnerability. Once more, the myth of safety surrounding Engels evaporated in the fire and smoke of cheap drones slipping through multi-billion-dollar defenses. For the crews stationed there, the psychological toll was immense. Mechanics, pilots, and guards now lived with the knowledge that the front had come to them. Each night on base was no longer routine maintenance or training. It was the possibility of sudden firestorms. For Russian civilians, the message was unavoidable. Saratov's residents could see the glow on the horizon, hear the detonations, and share videos that spread far beyond Russia's borders. Official reassurances that all drones were intercepted rang hollow against the backdrop of plumes visible for miles. On the practical level, the economics of the attack were impossible to ignore. Each Russian bomber represented billions in investment, not counting the infrastructure required to fuel, maintain, and operate it. And every missile Russia fired in defense cost vastly more than the drones they were targeting. This asymmetry was the heart of Ukraine's strategy. By sending waves of inexpensive drones, Kyiv forced Russia to expend costly interceptors, risk its most valuable assets, and maintain a constant state of high alert. Harassment became a weapon in itself. Not every drone needed to hit, so long as the swarm kept Russian crews awake at night and drained their resources. But there was more at play than material damage. June 6th was also proof of concept. Ukraine demonstrated yet again that drones could penetrate deep into Russian territory, navigate through electronic warfare zones, and land blows against one of Moscow's most protected bases. The immediate Russian response was to move its assets. Reports soon indicated that Moscow had quietly redeployed portions of its bomber fleet further east, deeper into Siberia, and away from Ukraine's growing drone reach. Engels, long considered a secure staging ground, could no longer be trusted as the primary hub of strategic aviation. In the short term, additional Pantsir S-1 batteries were rushed to the base. Camouflage nets were draped over bombers, and mock-ups were placed on runways as decoys. Concrete revetments and hardened shelters, long neglected, were suddenly a priority. The urgency betrayed an uncomfortable truth. Engels had been underprepared for the drone age. Strategically, the redeployments carried their own costs. Moving bombers east increased their distance from potential launch zones against Europe or the Middle East. Fueling and logistics became more complex, and the psychological aura of readiness diminished. A fleet that once stood as an immediate threat now seemed cautious, forced into hiding. For NATO observers, the lesson was clear. Russia's air defense system, long touted as impenetrable, had been breached repeatedly. Distance was no longer safety. If low-cost drones could torch bombers on the ground, then the calculus of global warfare had shifted. Billion-dollar airframes and billion-dollar defense networks could be humbled by swarms of expendable machines. By the time dawn broke over Saratov on June 6th, Engels was still smoldering. Black scars marred the runways, hangars lay twisted, and the outlines of scorched bombers were visible from above. What began as faint radar signatures at 2:41 a.m. had ended in another chapter of humiliation for Russia's long-range bomber fleet. The significance of the raid went far beyond the material losses. At least one Tu-95 had been damaged, and infrastructure lay in ruins. But the deeper blow was symbolic. Engels, the fortress of nuclear deterrence, had once again been struck by weapons that cost less than a single Russian missile defense intercept.